Money becomes dangerous when people think it is simple. Because the moment money looks ordinary, many decisions around it become careless. A person begins earning, spending, saving, borrowing, investing, comparing, wanting, delaying, fearing, and hoping, often without ever fully noticing that money is never only mathematical. It is emotional, historical, psychological, social, and deeply connected to identity in ways most people do not fully examine until life forces the examination. That is why some books about money feel very different from others. Some books teach techniques, some teach formulas, some teach products, systems, and strategies. But a smaller group of books quietly changes something deeper. They make money feel more serious, not frightening, not cold, but serious enough to deserve internal maturity. And that difference matters because many financial mistakes are not caused by lack of intelligence. They are caused by weak emotional interpretation. That is what today's 8 books do unusually well. They do not merely explain wealth, they change how wealth should be mentally held. And if this kind of thinking is rare in your daily environment, Sethtra Books exists for that exact reason. So serious readers can return to books that continue shaping judgment long after the video ends. The first book is The Psychology of Money. What makes this book powerful is that it begins by correcting one of the most misunderstood ideas in modern financial thinking, that money decisions are mostly rational. They are not. Morgan Housel explains that people often make money decisions through memory, fear, family history, personal insecurity, private ambitions, and invisible emotional scars long before logic enters the room. And once a reader truly understands that, many financial behaviors suddenly become clearer. Why does one person panic during normal market decline while another remains calm? Why does someone earning enough still feel permanently financially threatened? Why do intelligent people still destroy wealth through impatience? Why do many chase visible richness but fail to build durable financial peace? This book answers those questions not through technical complexity, but through psychological honesty. That is why it reaches so many readers across different ages. A weak financial mind often believes that wealth belongs mainly to those who know more. This book quietly reveals something harder. Wealth often survives better in those who behave better. That sounds simple until life tests it. Because behaving well with money often means tolerating boredom, resisting comparison, delaying ego purchases, and accepting that many intelligent decisions look unimpressive from outside. One of the deepest lessons in this book is that financial success often depends less on dramatic brilliance and more on avoiding repeated stupidity. That idea alone saves many people years, because modern culture constantly rewards visible movement. Yet, financially, much strength comes from controlled stillness, the ability to wait, the ability to remain unspectacular, the ability to allow compounding to remain emotionally acceptable. That is why this book does not simply explain money. It quietly lowers emotional noise around money. And once emotional noise lowers, financial seriousness begins. The second book, The 15 Senses of the Quiet Rich, approaches wealth from a very different angle. What makes this book distinct is that it does not treat wealth as public display. It treats wealth as internal sensing. That difference is rare. Because many books explain what rich people own, buy, invest in, or publicly achieve. This book repeatedly asks something quieter. What do certain people sense differently before wealth becomes visible? That question changes the tone immediately. The book suggests that serious wealth often begins long before bank statements become impressive. It begins in small inner recognitions, how time is felt, how silence is used, how opportunity is noticed, how unnecessary urgency is resisted, how emotional leaks are controlled, how reputation is protected, how hidden patterns are read. A weak financial thinker often waits for obvious opportunity. But the quiet rich often notice structure before opportunity becomes obvious. That is why the book's deeper strength is not simply financial language. It is perceptual language. It teaches that some people lose money not because they lack access, but because they repeatedly misread subtle signals around them. Signals of timing, signals of human reliability, signals of false prestige, signals of hidden fragility behind attractive offers, signals of unnecessary noise. And this becomes especially important in modern life, where many people confuse expensive visibility with genuine financial depth. The quiet rich often do the opposite. They build internal filters before external scale. This is why the book feels less like ordinary money advice and more like wealth psychology through deeper observation. And serious readers often discover that before wealth expands externally, perception usually matures internally first. The third book is The Intelligent Investor. Many people know this book because of its connection to Warren Buffett, but that alone does not explain why it remains powerful. Its real strength is that it teaches seriousness through discipline. Benjamin Graham repeatedly separates investing from emotional theater, and that separation remains one of the hardest financial lessons for modern people. Because modern markets often create emotional narratives stronger than actual value. Excitement spreads quickly. Fear spreads even faster. Confidence rises suddenly. Panic arrives suddenly. And many people begin treating investment decisions as emotional reaction rather than valuation. Graham refuses that. He introduces a way of thinking that feels almost morally disciplined. Do not ask what people feel first. Ask what something is worth. That sounds obvious until real money is involved. Because once real money enters, many people stop thinking clearly. They begin wanting reassurance. They begin chasing movement. They begin interpreting market energy as proof. This book repeatedly teaches that price and value are not identical, and that distinction has protected serious investors for generations. One reason the book still matters is because it also teaches humility. Not every investor must be brilliant, but every investor must understand the cost of emotional carelessness. The famous idea of margin of safety remains powerful because it reflects a deeper truth. Serious money respects uncertainty. Weak thinking assumes certainty where none exists. Strong financial thinking leaves room for being imperfect without being destroyed. That principle matters not only in stocks, but in business, partnerships, borrowing, expansion, and even personal career decisions. The fourth book, A Random Walk Down Wall Street, often surprises readers because it quietly dismantles many popular fantasies. Its central pressure is uncomfortable. What if many people who appear financially sophisticated are simply benefiting from luck, timing, or temporary conditions more than they admit? That question unsettles many readers, because modern finance often admires prediction. But Malkiel repeatedly shows how difficult consistent prediction actually is. Weak thinking often loves certainty dressed in confident language. This book weakens that attraction. It teaches skepticism toward exaggerated forecasting. It reminds readers that markets often move with complexity far beyond ordinary confidence. And strangely, this realism becomes calming rather than discouraging. Because once a reader accepts that not every movement must be conquered, unnecessary emotional pressure decreases. Many people lose money because they secretly believe they must outsmart every movement. This book quietly suggests another maturity. Perhaps disciplined participation matters more than dramatic superiority. That lesson often protects people from endless, unnecessary complexity. And complexity often hides financial ego. The fifth book is Against the Gods. This is one of the most intellectually satisfying books in money literature because it explains something larger than wealth itself, the history of risk. And once risk becomes historically understood, money feels immediately more serious. Because readers begin seeing that every financial decision sits inside a much larger human struggle, the attempt to understand uncertainty. For centuries, people did not merely try to earn money, they tried to understand chance, probability, danger, and consequence. This book shows how deeply civilization itself changed when humans began measuring uncertainty more accurately. That changes financial thinking profoundly, because weak money thinking often treats risk emotionally. Strong money thinking studies risk structurally. The reader begins understanding that behind insurance, markets, diversification, and investment systems lies one ancient truth. Uncertainty never disappears. It is only managed differently. That creates maturity. Because mature financial thinking no longer asks, "How do I eliminate uncertainty?" It asks, "How do I survive uncertainty intelligently?" That shift alone changes many financial behaviors. The sixth book, The Little Book of Common Sense Investing, looks simple but carries unusual force. John Bogle's writing often feels almost calm to the point of being underestimated. Yet the ideas inside are severe in their long-term implications. He repeatedly teaches that most people damage financial progress not because investing is impossible, but because unnecessary complexity seduces them. This is where money becomes serious again. Because many people secretly believe that financial intelligence must feel complicated. But Bogle shows that simplicity often defeats ego-driven sophistication over long periods. That is deeply difficult for many people to accept. Because simplicity feels emotionally unsatisfying at first. There is less excitement, less identity performance, less story, but often more durability. And durability is one of the least glamorous yet most powerful qualities in financial life. The idea of broad market participation with disciplined cost awareness seems almost too plain. Yet this plainness has quietly protected enormous wealth. A weak thinker often wants action to feel impressive. A stronger thinker eventually accepts that repetition, cost control, and patience often outperform emotional brilliance. The seventh book, The Richest Man in Babylon, remains alive because it explains financial seriousness through story rather than theory. That makes it unusually memorable. Its lessons are simple enough to repeat, yet deep enough to survive generations. Pay yourself first. Guard against unnecessary loss. Seek wise counsel. Allow money to multiply carefully. These ideas are old because they remain difficult. Modern readers sometimes underestimate old financial writing because language feels simple. But simplicity often survives because truth survives. A weak financial mind often searches for hidden complexity before mastering visible fundamentals. This book repeatedly returns the reader to fundamentals. And fundamentals remain where many lives either strengthen or weaken. The reason this book still matters is that money discipline often collapses not at advanced levels, but at very ordinary levels. Income allocation, unnecessary desire, weak patience, poor counsel, avoidable debt. The old Babylonian framing works because human temptation has not changed very much. The final book is Money, Master the Game. This book enters the conversation differently because it combines energy, access, and broad synthesis. Tony Robbins brings together multiple financial voices and attempts to make large financial structures understandable to ordinary readers. What makes it useful is not that every reader will follow every framework exactly. Its strength lies in widening financial seriousness. Many people avoid money depth because they assume it belongs only to specialists. This book lowers that psychological barrier. It says financial systems can be understood if approached patiently. And that matters because avoidance itself creates long-term weakness. The book repeatedly pushes readers toward participation, not reckless participation, but informed engagement. And for many readers, that is the beginning of financial adulthood, deciding that money will no longer remain emotionally vague. Because vague money thinking often produces vague outcomes, and vague outcomes eventually become expensive. What becomes clear across all 8 books is that serious money never begins only with larger numbers. It begins when the mind stops treating money casually, when spending becomes visible, when waiting becomes acceptable, when comparison loses authority, when risk becomes studied, when value becomes more important than appearance, when financial calm becomes more attractive than financial performance for show. That is why books like these matter far beyond financial literacy. They help correct emotional posture around money, and emotional posture often determines financial destiny more quietly than most people realize. Because long before wealth becomes measurable, habits become visible. A person's tone around money changes. Urgency changes. Fear changes. Impulse changes. The need to impress weakens. The ability to delay strengthens. And often, this internal seriousness becomes noticeable before external results fully arrive. That is why some readers quietly revisit money books during very different life seasons. One chapter means something different at 25 than at 45. A sentence about patience sounds different after a mistake. A paragraph about risk sounds different after loss. A story about restraint sounds different after watching others collapse under visible abundance. Serious money books remain alive because money itself never remains purely technical. It keeps touching character. It keeps touching ego. It keeps touching fear. It keeps touching future identity. And perhaps that is why truly useful money books never merely teach wealth. They teach proportion, and proportion protects more than income ever can. That is also why Sethtra Books continues choosing books where money is not treated as entertainment, but as a serious human subject connected to time, judgment, restraint, and internal maturity. Because when money becomes more serious in the mind, many unnecessary financial wounds become less likely. Not all at once, not dramatically, but quietly. And quiet correction often lasts longer than loud ambition. The strongest financial books do not make readers feel rich immediately. They make careless thinking harder to defend. And over years, that difference becomes enormous.